The hegemony had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. 400 star systems bent to their will. Countless species had been conquered, enslaved, and broken. They had perfected the art of war so completely that resistance had become a forgotten concept. No one fought back anymore. No one dared. High Archon stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Throne of Eternity. Below him, through the viewing ports, a world burned. Its cities had been beautiful once. Now they were ash. The inhabitants had refused to surrender quickly enough, so had made an example of them. It was efficient. It was necessary. It was how empires maintained order. Another world secured, High Archon, his tactical officer reported. Resistance has been eliminated. Survivors are being processed for labor allocation. Nodded slowly. His species was tall and slender, with skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their eyes were black pools that showed nothing. They had bred emotion out of their bloodline centuries ago. Emotion was inefficient. Emotion led to poor decisions. They were perfect rulers because they felt nothing at all. Set course for the next system, commanded. We have a schedule to maintain. The hegemony expanded like a slow tide, unstoppable and inevitable. Every century, more systems fell. Every century, more species learned to kneel. This was the natural order of things. The strong ruled. The weak served. They had proven themselves strongest of all. Then the unknown ship appeared. It dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of hegemony space, in a region that had been quiet for. The vessel was small, perhaps 1/100th the size of a warship. Its design was angular and practical, without the elegant curves that marked civilized spacecraft. It looked crude, primitive, like something a newly spacefaring species might build. Sensor Officer was the first to notice it. She ran the signature through every database the hegemony possessed. The ship matched nothing. Its energy readings were unlike any known technology. Its hull composition was unfamiliar. Most strangely of all, it was broadcasting signals in a language no translator could identify. High Archon reported, her voice carefully neutral. We have detected an unknown vessel. It does not match any species in our records. This was unusual. The hegemony had every spacefaring civilization in 3 galaxies. They knew every ship design, every weapon system, every communications protocol. An unknown vessel should have been impossible. Felt nothing at this news. Curiosity was an emotion and he had none. But his mind worked through the implications with cold precision. A new species meant new resources, new slaves, new territory to claim. Send a battle group, he ordered. Capture the vessel intact. I want its crew alive for study. 30 warships changed course. Each one was massive, bristling with plasma lances that could crack continents. Their shields could withstand nuclear bombardment. Their crews were trained from birth for combat. Against a single small vessel, it was absurd overkill. But the hegemony did not take chances. They had not survived 12,000 years by being careless. Aboard the unknown ship, Captain watched the approaching fleet with growing concern. Her vessel, the UES Perseverance, had never been designed for this. It was an explorer built for deep space research missions. 3 days ago, they had been mapping an unstable wormhole near the edge of human space. Something had gone wrong. The wormhole had collapsed around them, throwing them across distances that should have been impossible. Now they were somewhere else entirely, somewhere far from home, and 30 massive warships were heading directly toward them. Captain, they're not responding to our hails, Communications Officer David Park reported. I've tried every first contact protocol we have. They're just coming. Studied the approaching ships on her display. She was 43 years old, with short hair and eyes that had seen too much. 20 years in Earth's United Fleet had taught her to read situations quickly. These ships weren't coming to talk. Their formation was aggressive. Their weapons were powering up. Battle stations, she said quietly. All hands prepare for combat. Her crew moved without hesitation. There were 142 people aboard the Perseverance. Scientists, engineers, pilots, security personnel. They had trained for emergencies, but nothing like this. They were explorers facing a war fleet. "Captain," her first officer said carefully, "we can't fight 30 warships. We should run." "Run where?" asked. "We don't know where we are, we don't know how to get home, and those ships are faster than us." She studied the tactical display. "No, if they want to talk, we'll talk, if they want to fight." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The battle group reached weapons range and opened fire without warning. No demands for surrender. No attempts at communication. They simply began shooting, as if the Perseverance was nothing more than target practice. Plasma lances burned through space, enough firepower to vaporize a small moon. The Perseverance should have died in that first volley. Every tactical calculation said so. Every gunner expected to see the primitive ship explode into fragments. Instead, the Perseverance moved. It didn't move the way civilized ships moved, with graceful arcs and calculated trajectories. It jerked sideways with violent acceleration, spinning and diving in patterns that seemed almost random. The plasma bolts missed by meters. The Perseverance twisted through the barrage like a living thing dodging predators. Aboard the lead vessel, Commander watched with something that might have been confusion if her species allowed such things. The small ship was pulling maneuvers that would kill any crew. The acceleration forces alone should have turned its occupants into paste. No inertial dampeners in the galaxy could compensate for movements that sudden and violent. "What are they doing?" she demanded. "How are they surviving those maneuvers?" No one had an answer. The Perseverance kept dodging, it kept moving, and then it started shooting back. Human weapons were crude by standards. They used magnetic acceleration to fire solid projectiles at incredible speeds. No plasma, no energy beams, just chunks of metal moving fast enough to punch through anything in their path. The first ship lost its engine section when a tungsten round tore through its shields like they weren't there. The shields had been designed to disperse energy weapons. No one had seriously used kinetic projectiles in thousands of years. It was considered primitive, beneath advanced civilizations. The humans didn't care what was considered beneath them. They cared about what worked. 2 more ships died in the next 30 seconds, then 4 more. The Perseverance dived into the heart of the formation, so close that the ships risked hitting each other when they fired. It was insane. It was suicidal. It was completely against every tactical doctrine the hegemony had developed over. It was working. 12 warships were burning wreckage before the survivors finally broke formation and retreated. 12 ships destroyed by a single primitive vessel 1/100th their size. It was impossible. It was humiliating. It had happened anyway. On the Perseverance, Captain surveyed the damage. Her ship was hurt. Hull breaches on 3 decks. 17 wounded, 2 dead. They had survived, but just barely. "Captain," David Park said slowly, "I've been monitoring their communications. I think I'm starting to understand their language." He paused. "Captain, I don't think they were trying to capture us. I think they were trying to enslave us. Their transmissions mentioned something called processing facilities, labor allocation. These people, they're slavers. This whole region of space is controlled by slavers." Looked at the star map on her screen. Hundreds of systems, thousands of worlds, all controlled by an empire built on slavery, and her ship had just bloodied their nose. She should have been afraid. She should have looked for a way to run, to hide, to escape back to human space. Instead, she felt something else entirely, something cold and hard settling into her chest. "Then we have work to do," she said. "Find out everything you can about this hegemony, their strengths, their weaknesses, everything." Her crew stared at her. "Captain," her first officer said carefully, "are you suggesting we fight an empire?" Smiled, and there was no warmth in it at all. "I'm suggesting we remind them that some species don't kneel. The battle reports reached High Archon within the hour. He read them 3 times, certain there must be some error. 12 warships destroyed. A battle group routed by a single primitive vessel that shouldn't have been able to scratch their paint. "Explain this," he commanded his admirals. "Explain how this happened." The admirals had no explanation. The sensor data was clear but impossible. The small ship had moved in ways that should have killed its crew. It had used weapons that no civilized species had employed in. It had fought at ranges so close that proper tactical doctrine simply didn't apply. "Perhaps a malfunction in our weapon systems," one admiral suggested weakly. "Or sabotage. There must be some rational explanation." But there wasn't. They had simply encountered something they had never prepared for, an enemy that didn't fight by the rules. Dismissed his admirals and studied the sensor recordings alone. He watched the small ship dance through plasma fire. He watched it dive into formations where any sane commander would have kept distance. He watched its crew members perform repairs on the outer hull while the battle still raged, wearing nothing but thin suits against the vacuum of space. What kind of species did such things? He gave the order to assemble the Grand Armada, 40,000 warships, enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. It was excessive for one small vessel, but had not survived 12,000 years of political maneuvering by underestimating threats. This unknown species was dangerous. They needed to be captured, studied, and eliminated. The hunt began. Aboard the Perseverance, the crew had been working without sleep for 3 days. Chief Engineer Cole had kept the ship running through a combination of skill, determination, and creative swearing. The hull breaches were patched. The weapons were reloaded. The engines were functional, if barely. "We can't keep doing this," Dr. Sarah told the captain privately. Sarah was the ship's medical officer, responsible for keeping 140 humans alive in a hostile universe. "The crew is exhausted. We have wounded who need proper treatment. We need to find somewhere safe." "There is no safe," replied. She had been studying the intelligence David Park had gathered from communications. "This hegemony controls 400 star systems. They've enslaved dozens of species. The nearest edge of their territory is months away at our best speed, and they've already dispatched a fleet to find us. 40,000 ships." Sarah stared at her. 40,000. "They're not underestimating us anymore." The number was so absurd it almost didn't register. One ship against 40,000. It wasn't even a battle. It was an execution. "Then what do we do?" Sarah asked. Had been thinking about that question constantly. Running wasn't an option. Hiding might work for a while, but eventually they would be found. Fighting directly was suicide. That left only one approach: fighting indirectly. "We don't fight their fleet," said slowly. "We fight their empire. We make them bleed in places they can't protect. We show everyone watching that the masters can be hurt." "Everyone watching?" "The slaves," said. "Dozens of species, conquered and broken. What do you think happens if they see the hegemony lose? What happens if they start to believe resistance is possible?" Sarah understood. It wasn't about winning. It was about inspiring. One ship couldn't defeat an empire, but one ship could light a fire that might burn the empire down. The Perseverance went dark. All emissions stopped. No engine thrust. No active sensors. No communications. The ship drifted cold and silent through an asteroid field, invisible to anyone not looking in exactly the right place. The crew lived in darkness, rationing power, breathing recycled air that grew staler by the day. They watched the search for them. Thousands of ships spread across star systems, scanning everything. The Grand Armada was methodical and thorough, but space was vast, and one small ship was very easy to miss. Learned patience. She learned to wait for days while enemy patrols passed within kilometers of their hiding spot. She learned to read patrol patterns and find the gaps, and when the moment was right, she struck. The first target was a supply convoy. 12 transport ships carrying fuel and ammunition for the hunting fleet, protected by only 6 warships. The escorts never saw the Perseverance coming. It emerged from the shadow of a gas giant at maximum acceleration, weapons firing before they even registered its presence. Human weapons were crude, but crude didn't mean weak. Magnetic accelerators threw tungsten rounds at velocities that turned simple metal into devastating projectiles. The first escort exploded before it could raise shields. The second died trying to turn toward the threat. The third managed to fire back, but the Perseverance was already moving, dodging and weaving through the plasma bolts. In 90 seconds, every escort was destroyed. The transport ships surrendered immediately. They weren't warships. They weren't designed to fight. Didn't destroy them. Instead, she broadcast a message to their crews. Tell your masters what happened here. Tell them the humans send their regards. Then she took the fuel and ammunition and vanished back into the void. It happened again 3 days later. A sensor station destroyed, its data erased. Then a communications relay cutting off an entire sector from Hegemony Command. Then another convoy. Then an orbital facility. The Grand Armada couldn't be everywhere at once. They would rush to respond to an attack, only to find the Perseverance long gone. They would set traps, but the humans seemed to know which ones to avoid. They would spread their forces thin trying to protect everything, and the humans would strike wherever they were weakest. Commander was assigned to analyze the human tactics. She spent weeks studying every engagement, looking for patterns. What she found disturbed her deeply. They're not fighting like soldiers, she reported to the High Archon. They're fighting like predators. They don't attack when they're strongest. They attack when their prey is weakest. They track, they wait, they conserve their energy. And when they finally move, it's fast and brutal and over before the prey can respond. Your point, demanded. My point is that we've never fought anything like this. Our tactics assume a rational enemy who will engage in set-piece battles. These humans don't want battles. They want kills. There's a difference. The High Archon dismissed her analysis, but kept watching. She noticed other things too, things that troubled her even more than the tactical problems. The humans didn't use inertial dampeners because they didn't have them. Their bodies simply endured forces that would kill instantly. Some of them had metal reinforcing their bones. Others had synthetic compounds in their blood that carried oxygen more efficiently. They had modified themselves not to transcend physical limits, but to push through them. During one engagement, a human crew member was thrown against a bulkhead hard enough to break bones. Watched the sensor data in disbelief as the human got back up, splinted their own arm, and returned to their station. They kept fighting with a broken arm because their ship needed them. What kind of species refused to stop just because they were injured? What kind of species treated pain as an inconvenience rather than a warning? Had never felt fear. Her species had bred it out. But watching the humans fight, she began to understand what fear must be like. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Something the hegemony hadn't anticipated. The Perseverance's attacks weren't just causing material damage. They were being talked about. Slave species across the hegemony were whispering about the unknown ship that couldn't be caught. Stories spread through labor camps and processing facilities. A ship that appeared from nowhere. A species that could hurt the masters. For the first time in thousands of years, the conquered species had something they hadn't dared to feel: hope. On a mining world called Prime, a slave named heard the stories and wondered if they were true. His species had served the hegemony for 600 years. They had forgotten how to resist. But the stories about the humans made him remember something his grandfather had told him before the old man died in the mines. Empires seem eternal, his grandfather had said, but everything falls eventually, even mountains, even stars. All it takes is one crack in the foundation. Looked up at the sky and wondered if the humans were that crack. Aboard the Perseverance, knew nothing of or his hope. She only knew that her crew was still alive, still fighting, still free. They had lost 6 more people in the past month. The ship was held together with patches and prayers. They couldn't keep this up forever. But they didn't need forever. They just needed to plant seeds. Captain David Park reported one evening, "I've been monitoring hegemony internal communications. There's unrest. The slave species are talking about us. Some of the governors are requesting additional security. The Archon is pulling ships from the frontier to hunt us, and other powers are noticing the weakness." Smiled for the first time in weeks. "Then we're not just surviving," she said. "We're winning." 4 months had passed since the Perseverance first appeared in hegemony space. 4 months of running, hiding, and striking from the shadows. The Grand Armada was still hunting, but they had stopped calling it a hunt. Now they called it a containment operation. It sounded better than admitting they couldn't catch one ship. High Archon had not slept properly in weeks. His species didn't dream, but they could still feel the effects of exhaustion. The human problem was consuming everything. Governors from 100 worlds sent daily reports of unrest. The economy was straining as resources poured into the endless search. Worst of all, the border powers were testing hegemony defenses, sensing weakness like sharks smelling blood. All because of one ship. 140 primitive aliens who refused to die quietly. "We need to end this," told his war council. "Not contain it, end it. The longer this continues, the more damage it does." "The humans are impossible to predict," Admiral replied. "They don't follow tactical doctrine. They don't behave rationally. Every time we think we've anticipated their movements, they do something unexpected. Then we stop trying to predict them. We make them come to us." The plan was simple in concept. The humans had shown one consistent behavior. They took risks to hurt the hegemony. They attacked convoys even when the odds were against them. They destroyed facilities even when escape wasn't guaranteed. If the hegemony presented a target valuable enough, the humans would come. "A slave transport," decided. "We announce a major transfer of prisoners to the processing facilities at station. 10,000 slaves from a dozen species. The humans have been broadcasting messages to the conquered worlds. They clearly have some emotional attachment to the concept of freedom. They won't be able to resist. And when they come, 200 warships will be waiting, hidden behind sensor-blocking asteroids. The moment the humans engage, we close the trap." Admiral hesitated. "High Archon, we're using 10,000 slaves as bait. If the humans don't fall for the trap, or if the battle damages the transport, then we lose 10,000 slaves. We have billions more. This is acceptable." The order was given. The trap was set. Aboard the Perseverance studied the intelligence with growing suspicion. A slave transport, lightly guarded, passing through a system the Perseverance could reach. It was too convenient, too perfect. "It's obviously a trap," Cole said bluntly. The chief engineer had lost weight over the past months. They all had. "They're dangling those prisoners in front of us. Hopping will be stupid enough to take the bait." "Probably," agreed. "So we ignore it and find another target." Didn't respond immediately. She was looking at the sensor data, at the numbers. 10,000 slaves. 10,000 people being transported to processing facilities. She knew what processing facilities meant. She had intercepted enough hegemony communications to understand exactly what happened there. "Captain," Dr. Sarah said quietly, "I know what you're thinking, but we can't save everyone. We're one ship. We have to be smart about this. If we ignore this, those people die. If we walk into that trap, we die. And then who fights for all the others?" It was the logical argument. The smart argument had been making decisions like this for months, choosing which targets to hit, choosing which risks were acceptable, choosing who to save and who to leave behind. Each choice cost her something. She had 125 crew members left. 17 had died since they arrived. 17 people she had led to their deaths in a war that wasn't theirs against an enemy they had never known existed. She owed it to the survivors to keep them alive. But she kept thinking about those 10,000 prisoners, mothers and fathers, children, people who had done nothing wrong except be born into species the hegemony considered useful as slaves. They didn't know the Perseverance existed. They didn't know anyone was fighting for them. They would go to those processing facilities and they would never come out. "We hit the transport," said finally. Started to object, but she cut him off. "I know it's a trap. I know we might not survive. But if we start making choices based only on our survival, we become something I'm not willing to be. We came here to fight slavers. We can't fight slavers by watching slaves die." The crew didn't argue. They had followed her this far. They would follow her into the trap. The Perseverance arrived in the system 3 days later, drifting in cold and dark as always. Sensors immediately picked up the slave transport, exactly where intelligence said it would be. 6 escort vessels flanked it, light protection for such valuable cargo. "Anything else?" asked. "Nothing on sensors," her tactical officer reported. "But there's a lot of asteroid debris in this system, perfect place to hide a fleet." "Then that's where they are. Question is how many?" They didn't know. They couldn't know without active scans which would give away their position. Studied the system layout, calculating angles and distances. If she were setting a trap, where would she place her ships? "There," she said, pointing to a dense asteroid cluster near the transport's projected path. "And there. Maybe there too. They'll want to surround us once we engage." "That's a lot of possible hostiles," observed. "Yes. We're still doing this. We're still doing this." The Perseverance began its attack run. The trap sprung exactly as planned. The moment the human ship emerged from hiding and opened fire on the escorts, 200 warships dropped their sensor blocks and moved to encircle. In seconds, the Perseverance was surrounded. Plasma lances powered up across the fleet. Escape routes closed one by one. High Archon watched from his flagship with something that might have been satisfaction. Finally, after 4 months of humiliation, the primitive ship was trapped. There was nowhere to run, no tricks left to play. He opened a communication channel. "Human vessel," he broadcast, "you are surrounded. Your situation is hopeless. Surrender now and I will guarantee your crew will be treated as honored prisoners rather than common slaves. You will be studied rather than processed. This is my only offer." The response came seconds later. It wasn't words. It was acceleration data on his tactical display. The human ship was moving directly toward his flagship. "They're attacking," Admiral said in disbelief. "They're actually attacking." All ships opened fire. 200 warships unleashed their weapons simultaneously. The space around the Perseverance became a storm of plasma and energy. Nothing should have survived that barrage. Nothing could have survived that barrage. The Perseverance survived. It didn't survive through shields or armor. It survived through movement. That same impossible, violent movement that had shocked thee in the first battle. The ship twisted and rolled and dived through the narrowest gaps in the plasma fire, taking hits but never taking enough to die. Stood at her command console, feeling every impact through the deck plates. Alarms screamed. Damage reports flooded in. A dozen crew members were injured in the first 30 seconds. The ship was dying around her. But it was still moving, still fighting. "Target their flagship," she ordered. "Everything we have." The Perseverance's magnetic accelerators fired. Tungsten rounds crossed the distance in heartbeats. The first volley hit the throne of Eternity's shields and actually made them flicker. The second volley penetrated. The third tore through 3 decks of the massive ship. Felt his flagship shake and couldn't quite believe it. His vessel was the largest, most powerful warship in the hegemony. It had survived battles against entire enemy fleets. Now a ship, smaller than some of his cargo shuttles, was tearing holes in it. "Return fire. All ships concentrate on that vessel." But the Perseverance was too close now, using the flagship's own bulk as cover from other ships. It was knife-fighting range, the kind of combat that hadn't been seen in, the kind of combat that had forgotten how to fight. And then the Perseverance did something truly insane. It accelerated directly into the flagship, not firing, not dodging, just full thrust straight into the throne of Eternity's hull. The impact was catastrophic. The Perseverance's reinforced bow plowed through armor and bulkheads, burying the human ship in the guts of the flagship. Both vessels spun wildly, locked together, systems failing across the board. On the Perseverance's bridge pulled herself up from the deck. Blood ran from a gash on her forehead. Around her, her surviving crew was doing the same, grabbing weapons, checking equipment. "Boarding parties," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We're going in." 37 humans were still capable of fighting. 37 humans with magnetic rifles and explosive charges against a crew of thousands. The odds were impossible. They went anyway. The corridors of the Throne of Eternity were chaos. Emergency lights flickered red. Smoke poured from ruptured conduits. Crew members ran in all directions, some trying to fight the fires, others trying to reach battle stations, most simply trying to survive. Into this chaos came the humans. Led the first team through a breach in the hull, her magnetic rifle up and ready. The weapon was simple compared to technology. It used electromagnetic coils to accelerate metal projectiles. No elegant plasma, no sophisticated targeting, just physics applied with brutal efficiency. The first warrior they encountered was 7 feet tall and carried a plasma lance. He saw the humans emerge from the smoke and raised his weapon to fire. Shot him twice in the chest before his finger reached the trigger. He fell without a sound. "Move," ordered. "We need to reach the command deck." They moved, through corridors that seemed designed for giants, past damage control teams who died before they understood what was happening, over bodies of warriors who had never fought an enemy willing to close to arm's reach. They were not cowards. They were a warrior species with thousands of years of martial tradition. But their warfare had evolved toward ranged combat, toward ships exchanging fire across vast distances. They had forgotten what it meant to fight in tight spaces where reaction time mattered more than technology. The humans had not forgotten. Humanity's history was written in close combat, in trenches and buildings and jungles, in places where the person who moved fastest and hit hardest lived to see tomorrow. Cole fought beside his captain, his engineering tools forgotten in favor of a rifle and a knife. He was 52 years old and had never expected to die as a soldier, but if this was the end, he would make it count. "Hostiles left," someone shouted. Turned and fired. They dropped. Behind him he heard more shots, more bodies falling. They were cutting through the flagship's crew like a blade through paper. But not without cost. One of the crew fell when a plasma bolt caught her in the shoulder. Another went down when a warrior got close enough to use his strength advantage. The humans were winning every fight, but each fight made them weaker. "Captain," David Park said over the communication system. He had stayed aboard the Perseverance with the wounded, monitoring the situation. "I'm detecting a massive data transfer from the flagship's main computer. They're trying to wipe their systems." "Can you stop it?" "No, but I can do something better. I can hijack it." Didn't ask for details. She trusted her people. "Do it." David Park was a communications specialist, not a hacker. But 4 months of intercepting transmissions had taught him their systems. He had been preparing for an opportunity like this. Instead of stopping the data transfer, he redirected it. Instead of deleting the flagship's records, every file, every communication, every secret the hegemony had tried to keep, and then he added something new. The Perseverance had been recording everything since they arrived. Every battle, every victory, every message had broadcast. David compiled it all into a single package and attached it to the hegemony's own transmission. Then he sent it everywhere. The hegemony's communication network was vast and efficient, designed to reach every corner of their empire instantly. David used that efficiency against them. In seconds, his package was propagating across 400 star systems, to every slave world, to every labor camp, to every conquered species who had forgotten what hope felt like. On the mining world of Prime, a slave named was working his shift when the screens in the processing center flickered. The overseers looked at each other in confusion as unauthorized content appeared on every display. Saw a ship, a small crude ship unlike anything in hegemony records. He saw it fighting, he saw it winning, he saw warships burning. And he saw a human woman's face. She was injured and dirty and exhausted, but her eyes were fierce. "My name is," she said, "Captain of the UES Perseverance. We are humans and we do not kneel, neither should you." The video continued. Battles, victories, proof that the masters could bleed. Felt something crack inside him, something that had been frozen for 600 years. His hands were shaking. Around him, other slaves were watching the same images. Some were crying. Some were angry. All of them were feeling something the hegemony had tried to breed out of them. Hope and rage. Aboard the throne of eternity, finally reached the command deck. The massive doors had been sealed, but human explosives didn't care about security protocols. The blast threw the doors inward, and the humans followed. High Archon stood at the center of his bridge, surrounded by his personal guard. He was tall and terrible, a being who had ruled 400 worlds with absolute authority. Behind him, the viewing ports showed the battle still raging outside. Ships were trying to help their flagship while avoiding hitting it. The slave transport was forgotten. Everything was chaos. "You cannot win," said. His voice was cold and certain. "Even if you kill me, you will die here. My fleet will tear your ship apart. Your species will be hunted down and exterminated. Everything you have done is meaningless." Walked toward him. Her crew fanned out, rifles trained on the guards. She was bleeding from a dozen wounds. Her body ached in ways she couldn't describe. Behind her lay a trail of bodies, both inhuman. "You still don't understand," she said. "Understand what?" This was never about winning. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. A data tablet, cracked and scorched from the battle. She showed it to the High Archon. On the screen was a map of the hegemony, and across that map, lights were beginning to blink. Hundreds of lights, thousands, each one representing a communication node that had received David's transmission. "Right now," said, "every slave in your empire is watching us. They're seeing ships burn. They're hearing that resistance is possible. They're learning that you're not gods, you're just tyrants, and tyrants fall." Looked at the map. For the first time in his long existence, he felt something he couldn't quite identify, a cold sensation in his chest, a sense of things slipping beyond his control. "You cannot destroy an empire with a video." "I don't have to destroy it. I just have to crack the foundation. Your slaves will do the rest." Outside, the battle continued. The Perseverance was crippled, embedded in the flagship's hull, never to fly again. Most of her crew was dead. The 37 who had boarded the flagship had been reduced to 11. But across the hegemony, something was changing. On Prime, picked up a mining tool and looked at his overseer with new eyes. On a dozen other worlds, similar scenes were playing out. Slaves who had been broken for generations were remembering that they had once been warriors, that their ancestors had fought. High Archon raised his hand, signaling his guards to attack. Didn't flinch. "Kill me if you want," she said. "It doesn't matter anymore. The message is out, the fire is lit, and you can't unburn what's already burning." The guards moved forward. The humans raised their weapons. The last battle of the Perseverance's crew began. But in the grand scheme of things, it was already over. The spark had been struck. The tinder was dry. And across 400 star systems, an empire that had stood for 12,000 years was about to learn that nothing lasts forever. Not mountains, not stars, not even them. 6 months later, the galaxy had changed. The first uprisings began within days of the broadcast. Small things at first. A mining crew refusing to work. A processing facility set ablaze by its own workers. Guards found dead in their quarters with no witnesses. The hegemony responded with brutal force, as they always had. They massacred the rebels on Prime. They executed every slave on 3 moons as an example. It didn't work. For 12,000 years, fear had kept the empire together. Fear of punishment, fear of death, fear of what they would do to anyone who resisted. But the humans had shown that the masters could die too. The humans had fought and bled and killed warriors. The humans had rammed their tiny ship into the flagship of the Grand Armada. Fear only works when it flows one direction. Now it flowed both ways. The uprisings spread faster than the hegemony could contain them. Slave species that hadn't resisted and remembered how to fight. They didn't have warships or plasma lances. They had numbers. They had rage. They had nothing left to lose. And they had each other. For the first time, the conquered species began to coordinate. The from Prime made contact with resistance cells on other worlds. The who had been slaves longer than any other species shared their knowledge of hegemony weaknesses. Species that had never known each other existed found common cause. The empire was bleeding from 1,000 cuts. Border powers sensed the weakness and attacked. The hegemony had spent centuries intimidating its neighbors into submission. Now those neighbors saw an opportunity. Fleet engagements that once would have been unthinkable became weekly occurrences. The Grand Armada, already depleted from hunting one human ship, found itself fighting on multiple fronts. High Archon did not survive to see the worst of it. He died on the bridge of the Throne of Eternity, killed in the final minutes of the battle by a human rifle. His death was broadcast across the Empire along with everything else. The slaves saw their supreme ruler fall. They saw that even the High Archon was mortal. The new High Archon's nephew tried to restore order. He offered concessions. He promised reforms. He even freed some slaves in a desperate attempt to calm the storm. It was too late. The conquered species didn't want concessions. They wanted freedom and revenge. On a rebel flagship that had once been a battle cruiser, Captain watched the Empire crumble on the tactical displays. She was one of 31 humans who had survived the Battle of Station. The rebel forces had rescued them from the wreckage of the Throne of Eternity, having arrived too late to join the fight but early enough to save the survivors. 6 months of recovery had healed her body mostly. The scars remained. The nightmares remained. The memory of everyone she had lost remained. But she was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. "Captain," a voice said, turned to see us standing in the doorway. His name was Now, a new name he had taken after killing his first overseer. He led the rebel cell that had grown from the uprising on Prime. "We've received word from the science teams. The wormhole has been stabilized." Felt her heart skip, the wormhole that had brought them here. Her scientists had been working on it for months, trying to find a way to reopen the connection to human space. They can reach Earth. They already have. The first communication went through an hour ago. And his face was difficult to read, but had learned to recognize his species' expressions. He was pleased. "They're coming. Earth has dispatched a fleet, 40 ships with more to follow. They should arrive within the week." 40 ships, not enough to conquer an empire, but enough to matter. Enough to show that the humans hadn't been alone, that there were more where they came from. Nodded slowly. "Good, that's good." "The Council wishes to speak with you," continued. "They want you to lead the combined fleet against the hegemony core worlds." "No." The look surprised. "No." This isn't my war anymore. It's yours, all of yours. She gestured at the display where icons representing dozens of rebel fleets moved toward hegemony positions. I lit the match. You built the fire. You should be the ones to decide how it burns. But the humans. The humans will help. We'll fight beside you, advise you, supply you, but we won't lead you. You spent 12,000 years being ruled by others. You don't need new rulers. You need to rule yourselves. Was silent for a long moment. Then he bowed his head in a gesture of respect. The council will be disappointed, but I think I understand. He left and turned back to the display. So many lights, so many battles, so much death still to come. The hegemony wouldn't fall easily. They still had thousands of ships, billions of soldiers. The war would continue for years, maybe decades. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. The empire was dying. Nothing could save it now. A week later, the first human fleet emerged from the wormhole. Stood on the observation deck of her borrowed flagship, watching the familiar shapes of Earth vessels take formation. 40 ships, not as big as warships, but built with the same brutal practicality as the Perseverance. Behind them, she knew, more were coming. Earth had heard what one ship had accomplished. They were eager to see what a fleet could do. One of the new ships hailed her directly. The face that appeared on screen was Admiral James, her brother. His voice cracked slightly. They told us you were dead. Almost several times. She smiled, though it hurt. Took you long enough to get here. We came as fast as we could. The whole planet watched your broadcasts. Everyone knows what you did. He paused. You started a war, you know. Humanity is at war with an interstellar empire. Not just humanity, a dozen species, maybe more. The hegemony made a lot of enemies. And you made us a lot of friends. James studied her face through the screen. What happens now? Looked out at the assembled fleet. Human ships and rebel vessels, species that had never known each other existed, now fighting together. She thought about the Perseverance and everyone who had died aboard her. She thought about the slaves who were still fighting for their freedom across 400 star systems. Now we finish what we started, she said. The final push against the hegemony began 3 months later. By then, the rebel forces had swelled to something unprecedented. Hundreds of ships, millions of soldiers, species that had been conquered for, now armed and angry and fighting side by side with humans. The Battle of Prime, the hegemony, lasted for 3 days. The defenders fought with desperate fury, knowing that defeat meant the end of everything their civilization had built. But they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and for the first time in their history outfought. The new High Archon surrendered on the 3rd day. He was brought before the combined Rebel Council, a gathering of representatives from every species that had been enslaved. Was there, but she did not speak. She had kept her promise. This was their victory. The High Archon looked at the beings who had once been his empire's property. He still couldn't quite believe it had come to this. His species had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. They had been masters of creation. Now they were captives. How, he asked finally, how did this happen? We were stronger than all of you combined. Now a leader of the new Free Council stepped forward. You were stronger, he agreed, but you made one mistake. What mistake? You taught us that power was everything, that the strong rule and the weak serve, that nothing else matters, gestured toward. The humans taught us something different. They taught us that one ship, one crew, 142 beings willing to die for something bigger than themselves could shake the foundations of an empire. They showed us that you weren't gods, just tyrants, and tyrants always fall. The High Archon looked at the human woman who had started it all. She was small by standards, fragile. There was nothing special about her physically, and yet she had ended 12,000 years of dominion. How, he asked her directly. You were one ship, 142 beings. How did you end an empire? Met his eyes without flinching. We didn't end your empire, she said simply. We just reminded everyone else that empires can end. They did the rest. A year later, stood on a hill overlooking the first free city on Prime. The rebuilding had begun. Former slaves were learning what it meant to live without masters. It would take generations to heal the trauma of, but it was starting. Stood beside her, watching his people begin their new lives. The historians are already writing about it, he said. They're calling it the Great Liberation. They say it started when a single human ship appeared in hegemony space. It started before that, said. It started every time one of your people dreamed of freedom, even when they didn't dare say it out loud. We just gave that dream a voice. Still, you will be remembered. Thought about the perseverance, about the 111 crew members who hadn't lived to see this day, about Captain Sarah and Lieutenant Cole and all the others who had died in dark corridors and burning ships. Remember them, she said. Remember that this wasn't won by one person or one ship. It was won by everyone who refused to kneel, everyone who chose to fight, everyone who believed that something better was possible. She turned and walked back toward the shuttle that would take her to the orbiting fleet. There was still work to do. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had a role to play in what came next. Behind her, a civilization was being reborn. 1,000 species were learning to be free. And somewhere among the stars, the story of one small ship was being told in 100 languages, passed from world to world, generation to generation. They had seen nothing coming, one human ship, 142 beings, and they had ended an empire. Not through strength alone, not through superior technology, through something they had never understood and never would. Through hope, through defiance, through the simple, stubborn refusal to accept that the way things are is the way they have to be. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy, and it would never be forgotten.